trying to make sure the fans aren't blowing my microphone. Let's get to the bookstore. Okay. We're getting messages right when I'm trying to stream. Stop changing my settings. Stream elements. No, that's fine. Settings can be up sometimes. Should remember that. No. There we go. Okay. So, how's your week been? Me, it's been fucking hot. I guess I need to title for language and bullshit. Docs, stream information. Let's see, jokes out on Baskervilles. There's not really one on here for language. Oh, no. Profanity. No, mark that one. Yeah, it's all I'm gonna do. And I'm either early or I'm late or I don't know where I am. Let's see. I guess I'm heard okay. My feedback on. Fix that. Sometimes that's cool. Okay, why am I not hearing you? Hello? Are you hearing? Because I'm not hearing. Oh, I heard that time. Okay. One. And the sound are just so fucked. Oh well. But anyway, we are getting into the Hound of the Baskervilles tonight. Oh, yeah. I forgot my app. Fix that. Sherlock Holmes and Son. Properly equipped. Much better. Okay. I have to have my hat on. Well, if I'm reading Sherlock Holmes, I have to have the classic Deerstalker on. I mean, I would give myself the pipe, but I don't really want to encourage smoking. Drinking and cocaine use is fine, but smoking. I should probably get over to the study. Anyway, and me reading Hound of the Baskervilles. Because it was the next story on my list. Damn it, Gil. Why aren't you shouting out guilty? supposed to be not working. Oh, there it is. Boom. Days Gone. Was I watching that? I did watch part of that stream. Okay. I don't know if I want to read the preface to this book or not. I love how this one is just credit Conan Doyle. The picture of the book I have up there is from a first edition print, but what I'm reading from, it lists itself as a facsimile of the original publication from the magazine which it was in. So it says about 2 people. Must be there. To look, but I'm not going to say anything until they pop up. Might know who it is, but if they don't call themselves out, I'm not going to do it. But as we're already running late, because I went to get water and nothing else, I guess I will get into the story. If everyone is ready, of course. I'm not sitting in my chair. There we go. Anyway, go back window on standby. And let us begin in The Hound of the Baskervilles, another adventure of Sherlock Holmes by Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he was up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. I stood upon the hearth rug and picked up the stick which our visitor had left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, of a sort which is known as a young lawyer. Just under the head was a broad silver band nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., was engraved upon it, with the date 1884. It was just such a stick as the old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, reassured. Well, Watson, what do you make of it? Holmes was sitting with his back to me, and I had given up no sign of my occupation. How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head. I have, at least, a well-polished silver-plated coffee-pot in front of me. Said, but tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's stick? Since we have been so unfortunate as to miss him and have no notion of his errand, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by an examination of it. I think, said I, following as far as I could with the methods of my companion, That Dr. Mortimer is a successful elderly medical man, well esteemed, since those who know him give him this mark of their appreciation. Good, said Holmes. Excellent. I think also that the probability is in the favor of his being a country practitioner, who does a great deal of his visiting on foot. Why so? Because this stick, though originally a very handsome one, has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule is worn down, so it is evident that he has done a great amount of walking with it. Perfectly sound, said Holmes. And then again, there is the Friends of the CCH. I should guess that's to be of something hunt. The local hunt to whose members has possibly given some surgical assistance, and which has made him a small presentation in return. Really, Watson, you excel yourself, said Holmes, pushing back his chair and lighting a cigarette. I'm bound to say that in all the accounts which you have been so good to give, my own small achievements do have habitually underrated your own abilities. It may be so that you are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light. Some people without possessing genius have a remarkable power of simulating it. I confess, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your debt. I had never said as much before, and I must admit that his words gave me keen pleasure, for I had often been piqued by his indifference to my admiration and to the attempts which I made to give publicity his methods. I was proud to think that I had so far mastered his system as to apply it in a way which earned his approval. He now took the stick from my hands and examined it a few moments with his own naked eyes. And then, with an expression of interest, he laid down the cigarettes, and carrying the cane to the window, he looked over it again with his convex lens. Interesting, though elementary, he said, as he returned to his favorite corner of the city. There are certainly one or two indications upon this stick. It gives us the basis of several deductions. Has anything escaped me? I asked, with some self-importance. I trust that there is nothing of consequence which I have overlooked. I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. When I said that you stimulated me, I meant, to be frank, that in noticing your fallacies, I was occasionally guided towards the truth. Not only were you entirely wrong in this instance, the man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a great deal. Then I was right, to an extent. But that was all? No, no, my dear Watson, not all. By no means all. I would suggest, for example, that your presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than that of a hunt, and that when the initials CC are placed between the hospital and the words Charing Cross, very naturally suggest themselves. Maybe you're right. The probability lies in the direction, and if we take this working hypothesis with a fresh basis from which our start is construction of this unknown visitor. Well then, supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what further inferences may we know? Do none suggest themselves? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think that we might venture a little further into this. Look at it in this light. On the occasion, would it be most probable that such a presentation would be made? When would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment when Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the services of the hospital in order to start some practices for himself. We know there has been a presentation. We believe there has been a change of a town hospital to a country practice. It is, then, stretching the inference too far to say that the presentation was on the occasion of the change. It certainly seems possible. Now, you will observe that he could not have been on the staff of the hospital, since only a man well established in the London practice could hold such a position, and such a one would not drift into the country. What was he, then? If he was not in the hospital, and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician. A little more than a senior student. And he left 5 years ago. The date is on the stick. So your grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson, and the fellow emerges a young fellow under 30, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favorite dog, which I should describe roughly as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I laughed incredulously at Sherlock Holmes as he leaned back in the settee and blew little wavering rings of smoke up into the ceiling. As to the latter part, I have no means of checking you, said I, but at least it is not difficult to find out a few particulars about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could have been our visitor. I read it out loud. Mortimer, James, M.R.C.S., 1882, Grimpen, Dartmoor, Devon. House surgeon from 1882 to 1884 at Charing Cross Hospital. Winner of the Jackson Prize of Comparative Pathology with an essay entitled Is Disease a Reversion? Corresponding member of the Swedish Pathological Society, author of Some Freaks of Atavism, Lancet, 1882, Do We Progress? Journal of Psychology, March of 1883, medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley, and Highborough. No mention of the local hunt, Watson, said Holmes with a mischievous smile. But a country doctor, as you very astutely observed. I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember right, amiable, unambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only an amiable man in this world who receives testimonials, only an ambitious man who abandons a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog. He has been in the habit of carrying the stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog is held tightly in the middle, and there are marks of his teeth are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between these marks, is too broad, in my opinion, for a terrier, not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been, yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel. He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in the recess of the window. There was such a ring of conviction in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep. And there's the ring of its owner. Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He's a professional brother of yours, and your presence may be of assistance to me. Now is the dramatic moment of fate, Watson. When you hear a step upon the stairs which is walking into your life, and you know not whether for good or ill, what does Dr. James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, a specialist in crime? Come in! The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I had expected a typical country practitioner. He was very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out between two keen grey eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was clad in a professional manner, but rather slovenly fashion, for his frock coat was dingy and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long black and already bowed, and he walked forward with a forward thrust of his head and a general air of peering benevolence. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the stick in Holmes's hand, and he ran towards it with an exclamation of joy. "Oh, sure, I'm glad," he said. "I was not sure whether I'd left it here in the shipping office. I would not lose that stick for the world." "A presentation, I see," said Holmes. "Yes, sir." "From Charing Cross Hospital?" "From one or two friends there on the occasion of my marriage." "Dear, dear, that's bad," said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in mild astonishment. "Why is that bad?" "Only that you have disarranged our little discussions. You're married, you say?" "Yes, sir, I'm married, and so left the hospital, and with it all hopes of the consulting practice. It was necessary to make my home of my own." Come, come, we are not so very far, after all," said Holmes. "And now, Dr. James Mortimer." "Mr., sir, humble MRCS." Man of a precise mind, evidently. "A dabbler in science, Mr. Holmes. A picker-up of shells on the shores of the great unknown ocean. I presume that it is Mr. Sherlock Holmes whom I am addressing, and not... No, this is my friend, Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I've heard your name mentioned in connection with your friend. You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so dolichophylactic a skull and such well-marked supraorbital development. Would you have any objection to my running a finger along your perennial fissure? A cast of your skull, sir, until the original is available, would be an ornament for any anthropological museum. It is not my intention to be fulsome, but I confess that I covet your skull." Sherlock Holmes waved our strange visitor into a chair. "You are an enthusiast in your line of thoughts, I perceive, sir, as I am in mine," he said. "I observe from your forefinger that you make your own cigarettes. Have no hesitation in lighting them." The man drew out paper and tobacco and rolled one up and one with the other surprising dexterity. He had long, quivering fingers, and agile and restless as an antenna of an insect. Holmes was silent, but his little darting glances showed me the interest which he took in our curious companion. "I presume, sir," said at last, "that it was not merely for the purpose of examining my skull that you have come to do me the honor to call here last night and begin today." "No, sir, no. Though I am happy to have had the opportunity of doing that as well. I came to you, Mr. Holmes, because I recognize that I am myself an unpractical man, and because I am suddenly confronted with a most serious and extraordinary problem. Recognizing, as I do, that you are the second highest expert in Europe in Indeed, sir. May I inquire who has the honor of being the first? Asked Holmes with some asperity. To the man of precisely scientific mind, the work of Monsieur Bertillon must always appeal strongly. Then had you not better consult him? I said, sir, to the precisely scientific mind. But as a practical man of affairs, it is acknowledged that you stand alone. I trust, sir, that I have not inadvertently, just a little, said Holmes. I think, Dr. Mortimer, you would do wisely if, without much ado, you would kindly tell me plainly what the exact nature of your problem is, in which you demand my assistance. Holmes got pissy. Oh, there's a whooper. Don't know if I have a whooper or not. That's the first time I've heard Holmes get upset about someone commenting about his intelligence. Negative. The second greatest? Good lord. Man, that's kind of strange to hear. Okay. Oh. Back to the story. Anyway, if you're here and lurking, thank you for hanging out. I'm not even going to try to plug my book today. It's going to take forever for me to get paid for it anyway. Anyway, Chapter 2, The Curse of the Baskervilles. I have in my pocket a manuscript, said Dr. James Mortimer. Observe it as you enter the room, said Holmes. It is an old manuscript, maybe 18th century, unless it's a forgery. How can you say that, sir? You have presented an inch or two of it to my examination all the time you have been talking. It would be a poor expert who could not give the date of a document within a decade or so. You may possibly have read the little monograph upon the subject. I put that at 1730. The exact date is 1742. Dr. Mortimer drew it from his breast pocket. The family paper was committed to my care by Sir Charles Baskerville, whose sudden and tragic death some 3 months ago created so much excitement in Devonshire. I must say that I, as his personal friend, as well as his medical assistant, he was a strong-minded man, sir, shrewd, practical, and as unimaginative as I am myself. Yet he took his documents very seriously, and his mind was prepared for just such an end as did eventually overtake him. Holmes stretched out his hand for the manuscript and flattened it upon his knee. You observe, Watson, the alternative use of the long S and the short. It is one of the several indications which enabled me to fix the date. I looked over his shoulder at the yellow paper and the faded script. At the head was written Baskerville Hall, and below, in large scrawling figures, 1742. It appears to be a statement of some sort. Yes, it is a statement of a certain legend which runs in the Baskerville family. But I understand it is something more modern and practical upon which you wish to consult me. Most modern, most practical, pressing matter which which must be decided within 24 hours. But the manuscript is short and intimately connected with the affair. With your permission, I will read it to you. Holmes leaned back in his chair, placed his fingertips together, and closed his eyes with an air of resignation. Dr. Mortimer turned the script to the light and read in a high, crackling voice the following curious, old-world narrative. Of the origin of the Hound of the Baskervilles, there have been many statements. Yet as I come in a direct line of Hugo Baskerville, and as I had the story from my father, who also had it from his, I have set it down with all the belief in the occurred even as it here is set forth. And you'd have believe, my sons, that the same justice which punishes sin may also most graciously forgive it, and that no ban is so heavy but that by prayer and repentance it may be removed. Learn then from this story not to fear the fruits of the past, but rather to the circumspect in the future, that those foul passions whereby our family has suffered so grievously may not again be loosed upon our undoing. Know, then, that in the time of the Great Rebellion, the history by which, by a legend, Lord Charleston, I must earnestly commend to your attention, this manor of Baskerville was held by a Hugo of that name, nor can it be gainsaid that he was the most wild and profane and godless man. This, in truth, his neighbors might have pardoned, seeing that the saints have never flourished in these parts, but there was in him a certain wanton and cruel humour, which made his name by word throughout the West. It chanced that this Hugo came to love, if indeed so dark a passion may be known under the bright name, the daughter of a yeoman who held lands near the Baskerville estate. But the young maiden, being discreet and of good repute, would ever avoid him, for she feared his evil name. So it came to pass that one Michaelmas this Hugo, with 5 or 6 of his idle and wicked companions, stole down upon the farm and carried off the maiden, her father and brothers being from home, as he well knew. When they had brought her to the hall, the maiden was placed in an upper chamber, while Hugo and his friends sat down to a long carouse, as was their nightly custom. Now, the poor lass upstairs was like to have her wits turned by the singing and the shouting and the terrible oaths which came up to her from below. For they that the words used by Hugo Baskerville when he was in wine were such that might blast the man who said them. At last, in the stress of her fear, did she that night might have daunted the bravest or most active man, for by the aid of the growth of ivy which covered, and still covers, the south wall, she came down under the eaves, and so homeward across the moor, there being 3 leagues betwixt the hall and her father's farm. It chanced that some little time after Hugo left his guests to carry food and drink, with other worse things perchance, to his captive, and so found the cage empty and the bird escaped. Then, as it would seem, he became as one that hath the devil, for rushing down the stairs, down into the dining hall, he sprang upon the great table, flagons and trenchers flying before him, and he cried aloud before all the company that he would that very night render his body and soul to the powers of evil, if he might but overtake this wench. And while the revellers stood aghast at the fury of the man, one more wicked, or it may be more drunken than the rest, cried out that they should go put the hounds upon her. Whereat Hugo ran from the house, crying to his grooms that they should saddle his mare and unkennel the pack, and giving the hounds a kerchief of the maid's, he swung them in a line, and so off full cry in the moonlight over the mount. Now, for some space, the revellers stood agape, unable to understand all that had been done in such haste. But anon their bemused wits awoke, but to the nature of the deed which was like to be done upon the moorlands. Everything was now in an uproar, some calling for their pistols, some for their horses, and some for another flask of wine. But at length some sense came back to their crazed minds, and the whole of them, 13 in number, took horse and started in pursuit. The moon shone clearly above them, and they rode swiftly abreast, taking that course which the maid must needs have taken if she were to return home. They had gone a mile or two when they passed one of the night shepherds upon the moorlands, and they cried to him to know if he had seen the hunt. And the man, as the story goes, was so crazed with fear that he could scarce speak, but at last he said that he had indeed seen the unhappy maiden, with the hounds upon her track. "But I have seen more than that," he said, "for Hugo Baskerville passed me on the black mare, and there mutes behind him such a hound of hell as God forbid should ever be at my heels." So the drunken squires cursed the shepherd and rode on. But as soon as their skins turned cold, for there came a galloping across the moor, and the black mare, dabbed with white froth, went past with trailing bridle and empty saddle. When the revellers rose close together, for a great fear was among them, but they still followed over the moor, though each had been alone, he would have been right glad to have turned the horse's head. Riding slowly in this fashion, they came upon the hounds at last. These, though known for their valor and their breed, whimpering in a cluster at the head of a deep dip and boil, as we call it, upon the moor, some slinking away, and some with startling hackles and staring eyes, gazing down the narrow valley before them. The company had come to a halt, more sober men, as you may guess, than they had started. Most of them would by no means advance, but 3 of them, the boldest, and it may also be the most drunken, rode forward down the goyle. Now it opened into a broad space in which stood 2 of the great stones, still to be seen there, which were set by certain forgotten people some days of old. The moon was shining bright upon the clearing, and there in the center lay the unhappy maid where she had been fallen, dead of fear and of fatigue. But it was not the sight of her body, or yet it was that of the body of Hugo Baskerville lying near her, which raised the hair upon their heads, these 3 daredevil roysters. But it was that, standing over Hugo and plucking at his throat, there stood a foul thing, a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye had rested upon. And even as they looked, the thing tore the throat out of Hugo Baskerville, on which, as it turned, was blazing eyes and dripping jaws upon them. The 3 shrieked with fear and rode for dear life, still screaming across the moor. One, it is said, died that very night of what he had seen, and the other 2 were broken men for the rest of their days. Such is the tale, my sons, of the coming of the hound, which is said to be plagued the family so sorely ever since. If I have set it down, it is because that which is clearly known hath less terror than that which is but hinted at and guessed. Nor can it be denied that many of the family have been unhappy in their deaths, which have been sudden, bloody, and mysterious. Yet we may shelter ourselves in the infinite goodness of Providence, which would not be forever punish the innocent beyond the third or fourth generation, which is threatened in Holy Writ. To that Providence, my sons, I hereby commend you, and I counsel you by way of caution to forbear from crossing the moor in those dark hours of evil or of solitude. This is from Hugo Baskerville to his sons Roger and John, with instructions that they say nothing thereof to their sister Elizabeth. When Dr. Mortimer had finished reading this singular narrative, he pushed the spectacles up his forehead and stared across at Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The latter yawned and tossed the end of his cigarette into the fire. Well, said he, do you not find it interesting? To a collector of tales, Dr. Mortimer drew a folded newspaper out of his pocket. Now, Mr. Holmes, we will give you something a little more recent. This is the Devon County Chronicle of May 14th of this year. It is a short account of the facts elicited at the death of Sir Charles Baskerville, which occurred a few days before that date. My friend leaned a little forward with his expression and became intense. Our visitor readjusted his glasses and began. The recent sudden death of Sir Charles Baskerville, whose name has been mentioned in the probable Liberal candidate for Mid Devon at the next election, has cast a gloom over the county. Though Sir Charles had resided at Baskerville Hall for a comparatively short period, his amiability of character and extreme generosity had won the affection and respect of all who had been brought into contact with him. In these days of nouveau riche, it is refreshing to find a case in which a scion of the old country family, which has fallen upon evil days, is able to make back his fortune, and to bring it back with him to restore the fallen grandeur of his line. Sir Charles, as is well known, made large sums of money in South African speculation. More wise than those who go on to turn the wheels against him, he realized his gains and returned to England with them. It is only 2 years since he took up his residence at Baskerville Hall, and it is common talk how large those were schemes of reconstruction and improvement which have been interrupted by his death. Being himself childless, it was his openly expressed desire that the whole countryside should, within his own lifetime, profit from his good fortune, and many will be personal reasons for bewailing his untimely end. His generous donations to local and county charities have been frequently chronicled in these columns. The circumstances connected with the death of Sir Charles cannot be said to have been entirely cleared up by the inquest, but at least has been gone and done to dispose of which those rumors to which local superstition has given rise. There is no reason whatsoever to suspect foul play, or to imagine that death could have been from any other but natural causes. Sir Charles was a widower, and a man who may have been said to have been in some way eccentric habit of mind. In spite of his considerable wealth, he was simple in his personal tastes, and his indoor servants at Baskerville Hall considered the married couple of Barrymore, the husband acting as his butler, and the wife as his housekeeper. Their evidence, corroborated by that of the several friends, tends to show that Sir Charles's health has been for some time impaired, and points especially to some affection of the heart, manifesting itself in changes of color, breathlessness, and acute attacks of nervous depression. Dr. James Mortimer, a friend and medical attendant of the deceased, has given evidence to the same effect. The facts in this case are simple. Sir Charles Baskerville was in the habit every night before going to bed walking down the famous yew alley of Baskerville Hall. The evidence of the Barrymores shows that this has been his custom. On the 4th of May, Sir Charles declared his intention of starting next day for London and had ordered Barrymore to prepare his luggage. That night he went out for his usual nocturnal walk, in the course of which he was in the habit of smoking a cigar. He never returned. At 12 o'clock, Barrymore finding the hall door still open, he became alarmed, and lighting a lantern went in search of his master. The day had been wet, and Sir Charles' footprints were easily traced down the alley. Halfway down the walk, there is a gate which leads out to the moor. There were indications that Sir Charles had stood for some little time here. Then he proceeded down the alley, and it was at the far end of it on which the body was discovered. One fact which was not been explained by the statement of the Barrymores, that his master's footprints altered their character from time that he passed the moor gate, and that he appeared from thence onwards to have been walking upon his toes. One Murphy, a gypsy horse dealer, was on the moor at no great distance at the time. He appears to have been his own confession to have been the worse for drink. He declares that he heard cries, but is unable to state from which direction they came. No signs of violence were discovered upon Sir Charles's person, and though the doctor's evidence pointed to an almost incredible facial distortion, so great that Dr. Mortimer refused at first to believe that it was indeed his friend and patient who lay before him, it was explained that a case was not unusual in cases of dyspnea or death from cardiac exhaustion. This explanation was borne out by the post-mortem examination, which showed long-standing organic disease, and the coroner's jury laid a verdict in accordance with the medical evidence. It is well that this is so, for it is so obvious that the utmost importance of Sir Charles' heir should settle at the Hall, and continue the good work which has been sadly interrupted. Had the prosaic finding of the coroner not finally put an end to the romantic stories which have been whispered in connection with the affair that might have been difficult to find a tenant in Baskerville Hall. It is understood that the next of kin is Mr. Henry Baskerville, if he be still alive, the son of Sir Charles Baskerville's younger brother. The young man, when last heard, was in America, and inquiries being instituted with a view of informing him of his good fortune. Dr. Mortimer refolded his paper and placed it in his pocket. Those are the facts of the case, Mr. Holmes, in connection with the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. I must thank you, said Sherlock Holmes, for calling my attention to a case which certainly presents some features of interest. I had observed some newspaper comments in the time, but I was exceedingly preoccupied by the little affair of the Vatican cameos, and in my anxiety to oblige the Pope first I lost touch with several interesting English cases. This article, you say, contains all of the public facts. It does? Then let me have the private ones. He leaned back and pressed his fingertips together, and assumed his most impassive and judicial expression. In doing so, said Dr. Mortimer, who had begun to show signs of some strong emotion, I'm telling that which I have not confided to anyone. My motive for withholding it from the coroner's inquiry is that a man of science shrinks from placing himself in a public position of seeming to endorse popular superstition. I hold the further motive that Baskerville Hall, as the paper says, would certainly remain attenuated if anything were done to increase its already rather grim reputation. For both these reasons, I have thought that I was justified in telling rather less than I knew, since no practical good could come a result of it. But with you there is no reason why I should not be perfectly frank. The moor is very sparsely inhabited, and those who live near each other are thrown very much together. For this reason, I saw a good deal of Sir Charles Baskerville, with the exception of Mr. Frankland and Martyr Hall, and Mr. Stapleton, the naturalist. There are no other men of education within many miles. Sir Charles was a retiring man, but the chance of his illness brought us together, and a community of interests in science kept us so. He had brought back much scientific information from South Africa, and many a charming evening we have spent together discussing the comparative anatomy of the Bushmen of the Hottentot. Within the last few months, it became increasingly plain to me that Sir Charles' nervous system was strained to the breaking point. He had taken this legend, which I have read to you, exceedingly to heart, so much that, although he would walk in his own grounds, nothing would induce him to go out upon the moor at night. Incredible as it may appear to you, Mr. Holmes, he was honestly convinced that the dreadful fate overhung his family, and certainly the records which he was able to give of his ancestors were not encouraging. The idea of some ghastly presence constantly haunted him, and on one of the occasions he had asked me whether I had, on my medical journeys at night, ever seen any strange creature or heard the baying of a hound. The latter questions he put me several times, and always with a voice which vibrated with excitement. I can well remember driving up to his house in the evening, some 3 weeks before the fatal event. He chanced to be at the hall door, and I descended from my gig and was standing in front of him, when I saw his eyes fix themselves over my shoulder, and stare past me with an expression of the most dreadful horror. I whisked around just in time to catch a glimpse of something which I took to be a large black calf passing at the head of the drive. So excited and alarmed was he that I was compelled to go down to the spot where the animal had been and look around for it. It was gone. However, and the most incidents appeared to make the worst impression on my mind. I stayed with him all the evening, and it was on that occasion, to explain the emotion which he had shown, that he confided to me keeping the narrative which I read to you when I first came. I mention this small episode because it assumes some importance in view of the tragedy which followed, but I am convinced at the time that the matter was entirely trivial and that his excitement had no justification. It was at my advice that Sir Charles was about to go to London. His heart was, I knew, affected, and the constant anxiety in which he lived, however chimerical cause might have been, was evidently having a serious effect on his health. I thought that a few months among the distractions of town would send him back a new man. Mr. Stapleton, a mutual friend who was much concerned at his health, was of the same opinion. At last, the instant came of this terrible catastrophe. On the night of Sir Charles's death, Barrymore the butler, who made the discovery, sent Perkins the groom on horseback to me, and as I was sitting up late, I was able to reach Baskerville Hall within an hour of the event. I checked and corroborated all the facts which were mentioned at the inquest. I followed the footsteps down to the yew alley, and I saw the spot at the moor gate where he seemed to have waited. I remarked the change in the shape of Prince, and I noted that there were no other footsteps save those of Barrymore that gave on the soft gravel. And finally, I carefully examined the body, which had not been touched until my arrival. Sir Charles lay on his face, his arms out, his fingers dug into the ground, and his features convulsed with some strong emotion to such an extent that I could hardly have sworn his identity. There was certainly no physical injury of any kind. But one false statement was made by Barrymore at the inquest. He said that there were no traces upon the ground around the body. He did not observe any, but I did. Some little distance off, but fresh and clear. Footprints? Footprints. A man or a woman's? Dr. Mortimer looked strangely at us for an instant, and his voice sank almost to a whisper as he answered. Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound. That's not like it didn't do anything at all. Oh, because that sound was turned off. Okay, duh. I keep forgetting I had it turned off in here. But it's been an hour. I'm going to go ahead on the ads. Oh, no, it's not letting me. Damn it. Why didn't I know the ads ran? Well, at least the pre-roll's not going to be on for another hour. So does anyone hear the fan, or is it just me? Just me? No one hearing it on the microphone? I wonder what it would be like to have regular audio setup instead of just using a headset. I need to add this to my store. Mm. Okay. Stretching. Hydrate. So, get into chat. Mm. Anyway. Chapter 3. The Problem. I confess that at these words a shudder passed through me. There was a thrill in the doctor's voice which showed that he was himself deeply moved by that which he told us. Holmes leaned forward in his excitement, and his eyes had a hard, dry glitter which shot from them. He was keenly interested. You saw this, as clearly as I see you, and you said nothing. What was the use? How was it that no one else saw it? The marks were some 20-some yards from the body, and no one gave them a thought. I don't suppose that I should have done so bad if I had not known this legend. There are many sheepdogs in the moor. No doubt, but this was no sheepdog. You said it was large. Enormous. But it had not approached the body. No. What sort of night was it? Damp and raw. But not actually raining. No. What is the alley like? There are 2 lines of old yearling hedge, high, impenetrable. The walk in the center is about 8 foot across. Is there anything between the hedges and the walk? Yes, there's a strip of grass about 6 feet broad on either side. I understand that the yew hedge is penetrated at the point by the gate. Yes, the wicket gate which leads onto the moor. Is there no other opening? None. So that to reach the yew alley, one either has to come down it from the house, or else enter it by the moor gate. There is an exit through the summer house at the far side. Had Sir Charles reached it? No, he lay about 50 yards from it. Now, tell me, Dr. Mortimer, and this is important. The marks which you saw were on the path and not on the grass. No marks would show on the grass. So they were on the same side as the path as the moor gate. Yes, they were on the edge of the path on the same side of the moor gate. You interest me exceedingly. Another point. What's the wicket gate closed? Closed and padlocked. How high was it? About 4 feet high. Then anyone could have got over it. Yes. And what marks did you see by the wicket gate? None in particular. Good heaven! Did no one examine? Yes, I examined myself, and found nothing. It was all very confused. Sir Charles had evidently stood there for 5 or 10 minutes. How do you know that? Because the ash had twice dropped from his cigar. Excellent. This is a colleague, Watson, after our own heart. But the marks. He had left his own marks all over the patch of gravel. I would discern no others. Sherlock Holmes struck his hand against his knee with an impatient gesture. If I had only been there, he cried. It is evidently a case of extraordinary interest, and one which presented immense opportunities to the scientific mind. That gravel page upon which I might have read so much had been long ere been smudged by the rain, defaced by the clouds of curious peasants. Oh, Dr. Mortimer, to think that you should have called me in. You have indeed much to answer for. I could not call you in, Mr. Holmes, without disclosing the facts to the world, and I would have already given my reasons for not wishing to do so. Besides, why do you hesitate? There is a realm in which the most accurate and most experienced of detectives is helpless. You mean that the thing is supernatural? I did not positively say so. No, but you evidently think it. Since the tragedy, Mr. Holmes, there's none that have come to my ears of several incidents that are hard to reconcile with the settled nature of order. For example, I find that before the terrible event occurred, several people had seen a creature upon the moor which corresponds with this Baskerville demon, and which could not be possibly any animal known to science. They all agreed that it was a large creature, luminous, ghastly, and spectral. I have cross-examined these men, one of them a hard-headed countryman, one a farmer, one a farrier, and one a moorland farmer, all who tell the same story of this dreadful apparition, exactly corresponding to the hellhound of the legend. I assure you that there is a reign of terror in the district, and that it is a hardy man who will cross the moor at night. And you, a trained man of science, believe it to be supernatural. I do not know what to believe. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. I have hitherto confined my investigation to this world, he said. In a modest way have combated evil, but to take on a father of evil himself would perhaps be too ambitious a task. Yet you must admit, footmark is material. The original Hound was material enough to tug a man's throat out, and yet he was diabolical as well. I see that you have quite gone over to the supernaturalists. Now, Dr. Mortimer, tell me this. If you hold these views, why have you come to consult me at all? You tell me that you have the same breath that it is useless to investigate Sir Charles's death, and that you desire me to do it. I did not say that I desired you to do it. Then how can I assist you? By advising me as to what to do should Sir Henry Baskerville, who arrives at Waterloo Station. Dr. Mortimer looked at his watch. Exactly 1 hour and a quarter. He being the heir. Yes. On the death of Sir Charles, we inquired for this young gentleman, and found that he had been farming in Canada. From the accounts which we have reached us, he is an excellent fellow in every way. I speak now, not as a medical man, but as a trustee and executor of Sir Charles's will. There is no other claimant, I presume? None. The other kinsmen whom have been able to trace to Roger Baskerville, the youngest of 3 brothers, of whom is Sir Paul Charles was the elder. The second brother, who died young, is the father of this lad Henry. The third, Roger, was a black sheep of the family. He came to the old masterful Baskerville strain, and he was very much the image, and tell me, of the family picture of old Hugo. He made England too hot to hold him, and fled to Central America, and died there in 1876 of yellow fever. 1 hour and 5 minutes, I meet him at Waterloo Station. I have had to wire that he arrived in Southampton this morning. Now, Mr. Holmes, what would you advise me to do with him? Why should he not go into the home of his fathers? It seems natural, does it not? And yet, consider that every Baskerville who goes there meets with an evil fate. I feel sure that if Sir Charles could have spoken with him before his death, he would have warned me against bringing the last of the old race, and the heir to the great wealth, to that dreadful place. And yet I cannot be denied that the prosperity of the whole poor, bleak countryside depends upon his presence. All the good work which has been done by Sir Charles will crash to the ground if there is no tenant of the hall. I fear at least that I should be swayed too much by my own obvious interest in the matter. That is why I bring the case before you, and ask your advice. Holmes considered for a little while. Put into plain words the matter is this, he said. In your opinion, there is a diabolical agency which makes Dartmoor an unsafe abode for the Baskervilles. That is your opinion. At least I might go to lengths saying there's some evidence to say this might be so. Exactly. But surely, if your supernatural theory be correct, it could work the young man evil in London easily as Devonshire. The devil with merely local powers, like a parish vestry, or be too inconceivable of a thing. You put the matter more flippantly, Mr. Holmes, than you would probably do if you were brought into personal contact with these things. Your advice, then, as I understand it, is that the young man will be safe in Devonshire as he is in London. He comes in 50 minutes. What would you recommend? I recommend, sir, that you take a cab, call off your spaniel, who is scratching at my door, and proceed to Waterloo to meet Sir Henry Baskerville. And then? And then you will say nothing to him about the matter. I have made up my mind about it. How long will you take to make up your mind? 24 hours. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, Dr. Mortimer, I will be much obliged to you if you will call upon me here, and it will only be of help to me in my plans if you will bring the future Sir Henry Blake Baskerville with you. I will do so, Mr. Holmes. He scribbled an appointment on his shirt cuff and hurried in his strange, peering, absent-minded fashion. Holmes stopped him at the head of the stair. One more question, Mr. Mortimer. You say that before Sir Charles Baskerville's death, several people saw this apparition upon the moors. 3 people did. Did any see it after? I have not heard any. Thank you. Good morning. Holmes returned to his seat with that quiet look of inward satisfaction that meant that he had a congenial task before him. Go ahead, Watson. Unless I can help you. No, my dear fellow. It is an hour of action that I turn to you for aid. This is splendid. Really unique for some of the points of view. When you pass Bradley's, would you ask him to send up a pound of the strongest shag tobacco? Thank you. It would be as well if you would make it convenient not to return before evening. Then I should be very glad to compare impressions as to one of the most interesting problems which have been submitted to us this morning. I knew that seclusion and solitude were very necessary for my friend in those hours of intense mental concentration during which he weighed every particle of evidence, constructed alternative theories, balanced one against the other, and made up his mind to which points were essential and which were immaterial. I therefore spent the day at my club, and did not return to Baker Street until evening. It was nearly 9 o'clock when I found myself sitting in the sitting-room once more. My first impression, as I opened the door, was that the fire had broken out, for the room was so filled with smoke that the light of the lamp on the table was blurred by it. As I entered, however, my fears were set at rest, for it was acrid fumes of the strong, coarse tobacco which took me by the throat and set me coughing. Through the haze, I had a vague vision of Holmes in his dressing gown, coiled up in the armchair, and his black clay pipe between his lips. Several rolls of paper lay around him. "Caught cold, Watson," he said. "Oh, it's this poisonous atmosphere." "I suppose it is pretty thick, now that you mention it." "Thick? It's intolerable." "Open the window, then. You have been at your club all day, I perceive." "My dear Holmes, am I right?" "Certainly, but how?" He laughed at my bewildered expression. "There is a delightful freshness about you, Watson, which makes it all a pleasure to exercise my small powers which I possess at your expense. A gentleman goes forth in a showery and merry day. He returns immaculate in the evening, and his gloss on his hat and boots. He has been in a fixture, therefore, all day. He is not a man of intimate friends. Where, then, could he have been? Is it not obvious?" "Well, it is rather obvious." "The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. Where do you think I have been?" "Fixture also." "On the contrary, I have been to Devonshire." "Spirit?" "Exactly. My body has remained in this armchair, and has, I regret to observe, consumed in my absence 2 large pots of coffee and an incredible amount of tobacco. After you left, I sent down to Stamford's for the ordnance map of the portion of the moor, and my spirit has hovered over it all day. I flatter myself that I could find my way about." "A large-scale map, I presume?" "Very large." He unrolled one section and held it over his knee. "Here, have you seen this particular district that concerns us? That is Baskerville Hall in the middle." "With a wood around it?" "Exactly. I fancy the yew alley, though not marked under that name, must stretch along this line, with a moor, as you perceive, upon the right of it. A small clump of buildings here is the hamlet of German. Buildings here, where our friend Dr. Mortimer has his headquarters. Within a radius of 5 miles, there are, you see, only a few scattered dwellings. Here is the Laughter Hall, which was mentioned in our narrative. There is the house indicated here, which was the residence of the naturalist Stapleton, if I remember right, was his name. Here are the 2 moorland farmers, Hightor and Foulmire. Then 14 miles away, the great convict prison of Princeton. Between and around these scattered points extends the desolate, lifeless moor. This, then, is the stage upon which the tragedy has been played, and upon us which we may help." "It must be a wild place." "Yes, the setting is of a worthy one. The devil did desire to have a hand in the affairs of men." "Then are you yourself inclining to the supernatural explanation?" "The devil's agents may be of flesh and blood, may they not? There are 2 questions waiting for us in the South. The one is whether any crime has been committed at all. The second, what is the crime and how is it committed? Of course, if Dr. Mortimer's surmise would be correct, and we are dealing with the forces outside of the ordinary laws of nature, there is an end of our investigation. But we are bound to exhaust all other hypotheses before falling back upon this one. I think we'll shut that window again, if you don't mind. It is a singular thing, but I find that the concentrated atmosphere helps my concentration and thought. I have not pushed it to the length of getting into a box to think, and that is the logical outcome of my convictions." "Have you turned the case over in your mind?" "Yes, I've thought a great deal about it in the course of the day." "What do you make of it?" "It is bewildering. It is certainly a character of its own. There are points of distinction about it. Change into the footprints, for example. What do you make of it?" "Mortimer said that the man had walked on tiptoe down that portion of the alley." He only repeated what some fool had said at the inquest. Why should a man walk on tiptoe down the alley? What then? He was running, Watson. Running desperately. Running for his life. Running until his heart burst and he fell dead upon his face. Running from what? There lies our problem. There are indications that he was a man that was crazed with fear before he ever began to run. How can you say that? I am presuming that the cause of his fears came to him from across the moor. If that were so, it seems most probable only a man who had lost his wits would run from his house instead of towards it. If the gypsy's evidence may be taken true, he ran with the cries of help in the direction where help was least likely to be. Then, again, whom was he waiting for that night? Why was he waiting for him in the yew alley rather than his own house? Think that he was waiting for someone. The man was elderly and infirm. We can understand his taking an evening stroll, but the ground was damp and the night was inclement. Is it natural that he should stand for 5 or 10 minutes, as Dr. Mortimer, with his more practical sense than I should have given him, for deducted from the cigar ash? But he went out every evening. I think it unlikely that he waited at the moor gate every evening. On the contrary, the evidence is that he outsited the moor. That night he waited there. It was night before he made his departure for London. The thing takes shape, Watson. It becomes coherent. Might I ask you to hand me my violin? We will postpone all further thought until after we have had the advantage of meeting Dr. Mortimer, Sir Henry Baskerville. That's in chapter 3. One more chapter. Let's see who's on it for ratings, but ouch. Leg cramp. My shoulder popped. Ow. Ow. Mm. I'm up on a feeling. Okay, no song break. Half an hour or so left to go, and we've got one more chapter I want to do for the night. It's trying to keep the Sherlock Holmes stories to 4 chapters stream. So. Not sure how I'm going to sound Baskerville. And I'll figure it out when I get there. Chapter 4, Sir Henry Baskerville. Our table side was cleared early, and Holmes waited in his dressing gown for the promised interview. Our clients were punctual for their appointment, for the clock had just struck 10 when Dr. Mortimer was shown up, followed by the young baronet. The latter was a small, alert, dark-eyed man, about 30 years of age, very sturdily built, with thick black eyebrows and a strong, pugnacious face. He wore a ruddy-tinted tweed suit, and the weather-beaten appearance of one who had spent most of his time in the open air. And yet there was something in his steady eye and the quiet assurance of his bearing which indicated the gentleman. "This is Sir Henry Baskerville," said Dr. Mortimer. "Why, yes," said he, "and the strange thing is, Sherlock Holmes, that if my friend here is not to be found coming round this morning, I should have come on my own. I understand that you think a little puzzles, and I've had one this morning which wants more thinking out than I am able to give it. Pray, take a seat, Sir Henry. Do I understand that to say that you have yourself had some remarkable experience since you arrived in London?" "Nothing much importance, Mr. Holmes. Only a joke, as like as not. It was this letter, if you can call it a letter, which reached me this morning." He laid an envelope upon the table, and we bent over it. It was a common quality greyish in colour. The address, Sir Henry Baskerville, Northumberland Hotel, was printed in rough characters. The postmark, Charing Cross, and the date on the posting proceeded. "Who knew we were going to be at the Northumberland Hotel?" asked Holmes, glancing keenly across at officer. "No one could have known. We only decided after I met Dr. Mortimer." "But Dr. Mortimer was no doubt already stopping there." "No, I was staying with a friend," said the doctor. "There was no possible indication that we intended to go to this hotel." "Someone seems to be very deeply interested in your movements." Out of the envelope, he took a half sheet of foolscap paper and folded it into four. This he opened and spread flat on the table. Across the middle of it, a single sentence had been formed by an expedient of pasting printed words upon it. It ran, "As you value your life and your reason, keep away from the moor." The word "moor" only was printed in ink. "Now," said Sir Henry Baskerville, "perhaps you will tell me, Mr. Holmes, what in thunder is the meaning of that, and who is it that takes such interest in my affairs?" "What do you make of it, Dr. Mortimer? You must allow that there's nothing supernatural about this, at any rate." "No, sir, but it might very well come from someone who is convinced that the business is supernatural." "What business?" asked Sir Henry sharply. "It seems to me that all you gentlemen know a great deal more about this than I do my own affairs." "You shall share your knowledge before you leave this room, Sir Henry. I promise you that," said Sherlock Holmes. "We will confine ourselves in the present, with your permission, to this very interesting document, which must have been put together and posted yesterday. Have you yesterday's Times, Watson?" "Yes, it is here, in the corner." "Might I trouble you for it? The inside page, please, with the leading articles." He glanced swiftly over it, running his eyes up and down the columns. "Capital article on free trade. Permit me to give you an extract from it. You may be cajoled into imagining that your own special trade or your own industry will be encouraged by a protective tariff. It just stands to reason that the legislation must be in the long run keep away wealth from the country, diminish the value of your imports, and lower the general conditions of life in this island. What do you make of that, Watson?" cried Holmes in high glee, rubbing his hands together with satisfaction. "Don't you think that is an admirable sentiment?" Dr. Mortimer looked at Holmes with an air of professional interest. And Sir Henry Baskerville turned a pair of puzzled dark eyes upon me. I don't know much about the tariff and things of that kind, said he, but it seems to me that we've got a bit off the trail so far as that note is concerned. On the contrary, I think we are particularly hot upon the trail, Sir Henry. Watson. Watson here knows more about my methods than you do, but I fear that even he has not quite grasped the significance of this sentence. Oh, I confess I see no connection. And yet, my dear Watson, there is so close a connection that one is extracted itself from the other. You, your, life, reason, value, keep away, and the... Don't you see now whence these words have been taken? By thunder, you're right. Well, if that isn't smart, cried Sir Henry. If any possible doubt remained, it is settled by the fact that keep away and from thee are cut out from this one piece. Well, now, so it is. Really, Mr. Holmes, this exceeds anything which I would have imagined, said Dr. Mortimer, gazing at my friend in amazement. I could understand anyone saying that the words were from the newspaper, but that you should name which, and added to which the leading article, which is really one of the most remarkable things which I've ever known. How do you do it? I presume, Doctor, that you could tell that the skull of a nigger from that of an Eskimo? Oh, certainly. But how? Because it is my special hobby. The differences are obvious. The supraorbital crest, the facial angle, the maxillary groove. But this is my special hobby, and the differences are equally obvious. There is as much difference to my eyes between the lead bourgeois type of the Times article and the slovenly print of an evening halfpenny paper that there could be that you could be between the Negro and the Eskimo. The detection types is the most elementary branches of knowledge to the special experts in crime. Though I confess that once, when I was very young, I confused the Leeds Mercury with a Western Morning News. But a Times letter is entirely distinctive, and these words could have been taken from nothing else. As if it was done yesterday, a strong probability was that we should find these words in yesterday's issue. So far as I can follow you, then, Mr. Holmes, said Sir Henry Baskerville, someone cut out this message with scissors. Nail scissors, said Holmes. You can see that it was very short-bladed scissors, since the cutter had to take 2 snips over the keep away. That is so. Someone then cut out the message with a pair of short-bladed scissors and pasted it with paste? Gum, said Holmes. With gum on the paper, but I want to know why the word more should have been written. Because he could not find it in print. The other words were simple and might be found in any issue, but more is far less common. Why, of course, that would explain it. Have you read anything in this message, Mr. Holmes? There are 1 or 2 indications, and yet the utmost pains have been taken to remove all clues. The address, you observe, is printed in rough characters. But the Times is a paper which is seldom found in the hands but of those of the highly educated. We may take it, therefore, that the letter was composed by an educated man who wished to pose as an uneducated one, and his efforts to conceal his own writing suggest that he might be known, or come to be known by you. Again, you observe that the words are not gummed, accurate line, but that some are much higher than others. life, for example, is quite out of its proper place. That may point to a careless, or it may point to an agitation or hurry upon which part of the cutter. On the whole, the incline is to the latter view, since the matter was evidently important, and it was unlikely that the composer of such a letter would be careless. If he were in a hurry, it opens up to an interesting question. Why he should be in a hurry, since the letter posted up so early morning it reached Sir Henry before he could leave the hotel. Did the composer fear an interruption? From whom? We're coming now rather into the region of guesswork, said Dr. Mortimer. Say, rather into the region of where we balance probabilities and choose the most likely. It is a scientific use of the imagination, but we always have some material basis on which to start our speculations. Now, you would call it a guess, no doubt, but I am most certain that this address has been written in a hotel. How in the world could you say that? If you examine it carefully, you'll see that both the pen and the ink have given the writer trouble. The pen has sputtered twice in a single word, and has run dry 3 times in a short address. Following that, there is very little ink in the bottle. Now, a private pen or ink bottle is seldom allowed to be in such a state, and in the combination of the two must be quite rare. But you know the hotel ink and the hotel pen, where it is rare to get anything else. Yes, I have little hesitation to say that we could examine the waste paper baskets of the hotels around Charing Cross until we found the remains of the mutilated Times. We could lay our hands straight upon the person who sent the singular message. What? Hola? What's this? He was carefully examining the fool cap, which on the words were pasted, holding it only an inch or two from his eyes. Well? Nothing, he said, throwing it down. It's a half-blank piece of sheet of paper, even without a watermark upon it. I think we have drawn as much as we can from this curious letter. And now, Sir Henry, has anything else of interest happened to you since you have gone to London? Why, no, Mr. Holmes, I think not. I have not observed anyone following or watching you. I seem to have walked right into the thick of a dime novel, said our visitor. Why in thunder would anyone follow or watch me? We are coming to that. You have nothing else to report before we go into this matter? Well, it depends upon what you're worth reporting. I would think anything out of the ordinary routine of life well worth reporting. Sir Henry smiled. I don't know much about British life yet, for I have nearly spent all my life in the States and in Canada. But I hope that you lose one of your boots is not part of the ordinary routine of the life over here. You have lost one of your boots. My dear sir, cried Dr. Mortimer, it is only mislaid. You will find it when you return to the hotel. What is the use of troubling Mr. Holmes with trifles like that? Well, he asked for anything outside of the ordinary routine. Exactly, said Holmes. However foolish the incident may seem, you have lost one of your boots, you say. Well, mislaid it anyhow. I put them both outside my door last night, and there was only one in the morning. I could get no sense out of the chap who cleans them. The worst of it is, I only brought the one pair last night in the Strand, and I have never had them on. If you have never worn them, why did you put them out to be cleaned? They were tan boots and had never been varnished. That's why I put them out. Then I understand that on your arrival of London yesterday, you went out at once and bought a pair of boots. I did a great deal of shopping. Dr. Mortimer here went round with me. You see, if I'm here to be a squire down, I must dress the part, and it may be that I've got a little careless in my ways out west. Among other things, I brought these brown boots and gave $6 for them, and had one stolen before I'd even gotten them on my feet. It seems singularly useless thing to steal, said Sherlock Holmes. I confess that I share Dr. Mortimer's belief that it will not be long before the missing boot is found. And now, gentlemen, said the baronet with decision, it seems to me that I have been spoken quite enough about the little that I know. It is time that you kept your promise and gave me a full account of what we are all driving at. Your request is a very reasonable one, answered Holmes. Dr. Mortimer, I think you could not do better than to tell your story as you told it to us. Thus encouraged, our scientific friend drew his papers from his pocket and presented the whole case as he had done upon our morning before. Sir Henry Baskerville listened with the deepest attention and with an occasional exclamation of surprise. Well, I seem to have come into an inheritance with a vengeance, he said, when the long narrative was finished. Of course, I've heard of the Hound ever since I was in the nursery, but it's a pet story of the family, though I never thought of taking it seriously before. But as to my uncle's death, well, it all seems boiling up in my head, and I ain't got it clear. You don't seem quite to have made up your mind whether it's a case for a policeman or a clergyman. Precisely. And now this there's affair with the letter to me at the hotel. I suppose that fits into its place. It seems to show that someone knows more than we do about what goes on upon the moor, said Doctor. And also, said Holmes, that someone is not ill disposed towards you, since they warn you of the danger. Or it may be that they wish their own purposes to scare me away. Of course, that is possible also. I am very much indebted to you, Dr. Mortimer, for introducing me to a problem which presents several interesting alternatives. But the practical point which we know is to have to decide, Sir Henry, is whether or not it is advisable for you to go to Baskerville Hall. Why should I not go? There seems to be the danger. You mean danger from this family fiend, or do you mean danger from human beings? Well, that is what we have to find out. Whichever it is, my answer is fixed. There is no devil in hell, Mr. Holmes, and there is no man upon earth who can prevent me from going to the home of my own people. And you may take that as my final answer. His dark brows knitted and his face flushed to a dusky red as he spoke. It was evident that the fiery temper of the Baskervilles was not extinct in this last of their representatives. Meanwhile, he said, I've hardly had time to think over all that you've told me. It's a big thing for a man to have to understand and to decide at one sitting. I should like to have a quiet hour by myself to make up my mind. Now look here, Mr. Holmes, it's 11:30 now, and I'm going right away back to the hotel. Suppose you and your friend Dr. Watson come around and lunch with us at 2. I'll be able to tell you more clearly then how this thing strikes me. Is that convenient to you, Watson? Perfectly. Then you may expect us. Shall I have a cab called? I'd prefer to walk, for this affair has me rather flurried. I'll join you in a walk with pleasure, said his companion. Then we meet again at 2 o'clock. Au revoir and good morning. We heard the steps of our visitors descend the stair and the bang of the front door. In an instant, Holmes was changed from the languid dreamer to the man of action. Your hat and boots, Watson, quick, not a moment to lose. He rushed into his room in his dressing gown, and was back again in a few seconds in a frock coat. We hurried together down the stairs into the street. Dr. Mortimer and Baskerville were still visible about 200 yards ahead of us in the direction of Oxford Street. Shall I run on and stop them? Not for the world, dear Watson. I am perfectly satisfied with your company, if you will tolerate me. Our friends are wise, for it is certainly a very fine morning for a walk. He quickened his pace until we had decreased the distance which divided us by about half. Then, still keeping 100 yards behind, we followed into Oxford Street and down Regent Street. Once our friends stopped and stared into a shop window, upon which Holmes did the same. An instant afterwards he gave a little cry of satisfaction, and following the direction of his eager eyes, I saw that a hansom cab with a man inside, which had halted on the other side of the street, was now walking slowly onward again. There's our man, Watson. Come along, we'll have a good look at him, if we can do no more. In an instant I was aware of the bushy black beard and the pair of piercing eyes turned upon us through the side window of the cab. Instantly the trapdoor on the top flew up, something was screamed at the driver, and the cab flew madly down out of Regent Street. Holmes looked eagerly around for another. No empty one was in sight. Then he dashed in wild pursuit amid the stream of traffic, but the start was too great, and already was a cab out of sight. There now, said Holmes bitterly as he emerged, panting and white with vexation from the tide of vehicles. Was ever such bad luck, and such bad management too? Watson, if you are an honest man, you will record this also, and set it against my success. Who was the man? I have no idea. The spy? Well, it was evident from what we have heard that Baskerville has been very closely shadowed by someone since he has been in town. How else would it be known so quickly that it was the Northumberland Hotel which he had chosen? If they had followed him the first day, I argued that they would also follow him the second. You may have observed that I twice strolled over to the window while Dr. Mortimer was reading his telegram. Yes, I remember. I was looking out for loiterers in the street, but I saw none. We are dealing with a clever man, Watson. This matter cuts very deep. Though I have not finally made up my mind whether this is a benevolent or malevolent agency which is in touch with us, I am conscious always of power and design. When our friends left us, I at once followed them in the hopes of marking down this invisible attendant. So wily was he that he had not trusted himself upon foot, but he had availed himself of a cab, so that he could loiter behind, or dash past them to escape their notice. This method had the additional advantage that if they were to be taking a cab, he was already ready to follow them. It was, however, one obvious disadvantage. It put him in the power of a cabman. Exactly. What a pity we did not get the number. My dear Watson, clumsy as I have been, you surely did not seriously imagine that I neglected to get the number. 2704 is our man, but that is of use to us at the moment. I fail to see how you could have done more. On observing the cab, I should have instantly turned and walked in the other direction. I should then have, at my leisure, hired a second cab and followed the first at a respectful distance, or better still, have driven to the Northumberland Hotel and waited there. When our unknown had followed Baskerville home, we should have had the opportunity of playing his own game upon himself, and seeing where he made for. As it is, by an indiscreet eagerness which has taken advantage with an extraordinary quickness and energy by our opponents, we have betrayed ourselves and have lost our man. He had been sauntering slowly down Regent Street during the discussion. Dr. Mortimer, with his companion, had long vanished in front of us. There is no object in our following them, said Holmes. The shadow has departed and will not return. We must see what further cards we have in our hands, play them with decision. Could you swear to that man's face within the cab? I can only swear by the beard. And so could I, from which I gather that, in all probability, it was a false one. A clever man upon so delicate an errand has no use for a beard, save to conceal his features. Come in here, Watson. He turned into a distinct messenger office, where he was warmly greeted by the manager. Ah, Wilson, I see you have not forgotten the little case in which I had your good fortune to help you with. No, indeed, sir, I have not. You saved my good name, and perhaps my life. My dear fellow, you exaggerate. I have some recollection, Wilson, that you had among your boys a lad named Cartwright who showed some ability in during investigation. Yes, sir, he's still with us. Could you ring him up? Thank you. And I should be glad to have change of this £5 note. A lad of 14, with bright, keen face, had obeyed the summons of the manager. He stood now gazing with great reverence at the famous detective. Let me have the hotel directory, said Holmes. Yes, sir. Now, Cartwright, there are a few names of 23 hotels here, all in the immediate neighborhood of Charing Cross. Do you see? Yes, sir. You will visit each one of these in turn. Yes, sir. You will begin in each case by giving the outside porter 1 shilling. Here are 23 shillings. Yes, sir. You will tell him that you want to see the waste paper of yesterday. You will say that it is an important telegram you miscarried, and that you are looking for it. Do you understand? Yes, sir. By what you are really looking for is the center page of the Times, with some holes cut out with scissors. Here's a copy of the Times. This is the page. You can easily recognize it, could you not? Yes, sir. In each case, the outside porter will send you to the hall porter, to whom you will also give a shilling. There are 23 shillings. You will then learn the possibility of 23 cases out of 23. 20 cases of 23, if the waste of the day has been burned or removed. The other 3 cases will be shown a heap of paper, and you will look for this page and the Times among it. The odds are enormous against your finding it. There are 10 shillings over in case of emergencies. Let me have a report by wire at Baker Street before evening. And now, Watson, it only remains for us to find out by wire the identity of the cabman, number 2704, and then we will drop into one of the Bond Street picture galleries and fill in the time we have due at the hotel. Ouch. Alright then. Ta-da! Okay, I've had this fly buzzing around my back for the past 10 minutes. And it bugs me. But again, thank you for lurkers. I hope you appreciated the first 4 chapters of Hound of the Baskervilles. Now let's see who is on today. Unless, of course, anyone has a raid suggestion, which, despite me having points for it, you can just mention in chat. Oh, there's the fan blowing in my microphone. Ouch. Let's see, Dusk is on, Baffy's on. God is on. One person is showing. Ow. They do a raid. Slug off. What is a Ribumbi? Ribumbi. More people than off. So just Student Gundam. Punch. You're watching Adora. That was loud. Ah, Adora's on break anyway. Oh well. Ribumbi escaped. Anyway, if you don't know, books out. Buy. Buy books. Books are good. Oh well. Let me see. Did I fix my rates? Okay, I did fix it. Cool. Thank you, Gil. A subscriber one. It's always fun to do. Dropping some hand. And we're going to go ahead and raid Dusk because raiding Dusk is fun. And you can see the wonderful artwork that Dusk did. That's I just had to use for my closing. I mean, it's appropriate. It's me sleeping among books, so why not use it? Anyway, I hope everyone has a great night and stuff and nonsense. It's crazy. Yeah. So, I hope everyone has a good night if you're here. And I will see you tomorrow for Regional Fairy Tales. Ta-ta.